What's up, squad? Welcome back. It's been a few weeks since we last checked in. Life has been lifing, to put it lightly. In this episode, we're going to be playing a little bit of catch up. We are going to be discussing both the NFL as well as the NBA. Two of the main conversations I want to start with are, number one, the JJ Redick, Pat Bev, Austin Reeves, somewhat of a little bit of a tiff going on between those dudes on social media and on their respective podcasts. The second thing I want to cover as well is why I think the NFL will never be beaten in America and why the NBA continues to lose a ton of ground on them. So those are going to be two of the main conversations, but I'm also going to throw in a couple things here that I have written down. So I want to talk a little bit about what's going on with the Jets in the Aaron Rodgers article that came out from The Athletic. I have some interesting takes on that. And then I also want to discuss what the hell happened with the Commanders and Ben Johnson and Magic Johnson and all of that. So we've got some contention going on here in all of these different conversations. So before we jump into it, would appreciate a like and subscribe. As always, you know how much it means to me for you to be here. You could be watching a million other things, but you're here with me, and so I appreciate that. Since it's a longer video than normal, what I want to do is just let you know that I'm going to put the chapters down below. So if there's a specific topic that you want to kind of start off with, feel free to do so. And so let's jump into it. Kind of poking the bear in this situation starts with JJ Redick getting on First Take and saying that there's never any accountability for Doc Rivers and how he's pretty much underperformed, which is something I've talked about here ad nauseum. So I think he says, I've seen the trend for years. The trend is always making excuses. Doc, we get it. Taking over a team in the middle of the season is hard, but it's always an excuse. It's always throwing your team under the bus. There's never accountability with that guy. First things first, in terms of that specific comment, is he's not wrong. Doc Rivers gets the level of support and benefit of the doubt that a lot of Black coaches don't get in these major sports leagues. And so more power to him in that regard. There are so many massive failures deep into the playoffs with Doc Rivers at the helm in different organizations with different rosters, different leadership. Everything is completely different. And still somehow he's replicating this really poor performance when they have that significant lead. It's so rare in the NBA to be able to come back from 3-1. I mean, we know that that's something that almost never happens. And so for Doc to be on the wrong side of that, I do think that there's some credibility in JJ saying that he's not held to the same standard as other coaches. I think, what you see with Milwaukee is, and even Doc coming out and saying, he asked ownership when they wanted to hire him why they were going that direction. And so with Milwaukee, what you could really see was a bad organizational move from the top down. And I'll link the video here to talk a little bit more in depth of what I think happened. And because there was so much chaos with the Adrian Griffin signing as the head coach, they wanted a grown-up in the room. And that's the one thing that Doc is always, right? He's respected. He is revered in some circles in the NBA. And that's why he gets a ton of chances. Because, your team is never going to be awful with Doc, but there's a lot of people who think that, he was completely carried by that Boston Celtics roster that really was a juggernaut at the time. So I think, it's fair to say that this guy gets a lot of passes, but at the same time, of course, the players respect him and his resume. Sometimes when you got a chip, it's not, they don't grow on trees. And so I think that stuff matters. I think, right now you're not seeing the product on the court. And I don't think at this point in Doc's career, you bring him in to be some type of, otherworldly schemer on the court in terms of plays. I mean, there's a ton. I mean, this team right now to go out and get Dame, clearly he's not happy. I don't know how in the world he could be. But now for them to be in that situation, Dame's still talking about Miami, wishing he was there, basically. And they're massively underperforming. That's kind of what you were gonna get. And so you somewhat mortgage things on the court in order to get a hold of your locker room. And so I think they signed him to a $40 million contract. And so I think that's the perplexing thing to me, right? It's like you just want him to make things better, bring him in that more expanded consultancy role that he was in, right? Get rid of Griffin, get an interim guy. There's a bunch of dudes on that staff who are legitimate coaches in this league, have had teams of their own. And so he could have easily been in the place where I think a lot of us think that he should have been, which is more so, how do we make sure that the operations are good, right? Not how are we going to put together these incredible offensive and defensive systems. Like, it's just not going to happen. We've seen it time and time again. We look at what Patrick Beverley said, basically talking about how JJ Redick, his career was saved by Doc Rivers. And I don't really think that that's a fair assessment. JJ had a decently long career after his time with the Clippers. And so number one, when you think about Patrick Beverley and you think about Austin Rivers, right, getting in on this conversation, those two dudes have not had the same career that JJ Redick has had. Not on the college level, and certainly not on the NBA level. And so I think JJ has he's got some ammunition here, right? So he goes and he puts up these stats of what happened when he was on James Harden in the playoffs. And basically a lot of people are saying he completely cooked Pat Beverley by talking about how JJ wasn't the main reason that they lost the lead. Austin Rivers and Patrick Beverley are not in the same breath as far as I'm concerned, because JJ Redick, no, he's not a create your own shot, put the ball on the floor, but he was one of the best shooters we have ever seen. And so Patrick Beverley and Austin Rivers, they don't have anything in their repertoire where you say, they're one of the top 5 to 10 in the world at. Maybe Pat Beverley's he's a top 10 pest. But other than that, I mean, you're talking basketball, things on the court. I mean, it's not really a conversation. I think, yeah, of course it's shitty to see JJ go out and talk about his former coach, and I can see how that might rub people the wrong way, but he's just not, he's not saying it in a way that is very palatable to people. And that's just not the type of guy JJ is. And just to close out on this topic, Austin Rivers, for him to say that Doc Rivers is the reason that JJ had the career that he had is insane. Austin Rivers should have been out of the NBA if it was not for his dad bringing him back on these ridiculous contracts on the team. So that's why I can't even entertain the conversation right now about Austin Rivers calling the kettle black or whatever the expression is. So unbelievable. Let's hop into the NFL right now. There is one thing, a single thing that you can point to about the NFL that makes it unlike any other sport in America, and why those other 3 sports leagues are not close to being in the same breath as the NFL. And the word is hope. Every single day throughout, whether that's the off season or in season, there is legitimate hope that the Detroit Lions, who haven't won a home playoff game in 50 years, that they can come back in one season and make it to the NFC Championship game. Even though the rest of us understand that this is Patrick Mahomes' league, He's probably going to continue to do things we've never seen, and he may even get a three-peat. There's going to be interest in, number one, seeing him do that, but secondly, it's the hope that your team can knock him off. Think about Buffalo Bills fans for a second. How delusional are they? They genuinely think that they can knock the Kansas City Chiefs or the Bengals or the Ravens off. And they haven't made any improvements. They haven't made any changes to their coaching staff. I think they're well overdue for a Sean McDermott, coaching change. But they still tune in. They still go in negative 10-degree weather because there's a hope that they could be the ones to dethrone. Unfortunately, when you put NFL teams down on paper, right? Or you look at, let's say, baseball or basketball, you put those teams on pieces of paper. With an NFL team, you really have no idea what team is walking through that door on week 1. You just don't. There's so many hypotheticals. There's so many free agent moves. There's so many guys on the roster, and there's so many people in that building and kooky owners, right? Who legitimately can make a decision or can make a play that can change the complete complexion of the game, the month, and the year. When you take a look at an NBA team on a piece of paper, you pretty much have an idea of where they're going to end up in the standings. You understand who their top scorers are going to be, what they're going to average in terms of those key stats. And it's pretty much the same thing with baseball, right? You're going to look at that pitching staff. And the only real variation with basketball or baseball conversations with where you're thinking about how this team is going to end, it really has to do with health. And the NFL, right, we always talk about later in the season, it's a game of attrition. And so there is a hope with the NFL. There is parity. There is an uncertainty from week to week, honestly, moment to moment. These are things that make the NFL so varied and so unpredictable. And the Chiefs are likely going to three-peat, right? There's a real good case that this was the worst they were going to be during this era. And if you couldn't knock them off then, you may never knock them off again, right? But that doesn't stop fans. That doesn't stop anybody from sitting in front of their TV for 10 hours on a Sunday. It's just never going to happen. So that's part of the reason. I mean, there's just not a ton of hope that the Memphis Grizzlies are going to make a deep run to the Western Conference Finals. It's going to be the same teams as always. And one guy goes down, your entire season is tanked. So with the NFL, if a dude goes down, there's still a chance, but there's just too many variables that are happening for us not to pay attention. So we're going to talk about Ben Johnson and the Commanders right now. And let's start off with this question. Since when are we fighting in favor of billionaires over the little guy? In this case is Ben Johnson. Is that what we're doing now? Are we continuing to side with the guys who have 100 million options for anything that they do in business at any time? Listen, Magic and the owner of the Commanders, their legacies are largely solidified. If they don't make the Ben Johnson hire, nobody cares. It's not going to impact how people see Magic Johnson or how people see the owner of the Philadelphia 76ers. That's not going to define who they are. But if Ben Johnson gets a weird feeling in his stomach about the operation there, I mean, how could you not? First off, if he says, I may only get one opportunity at this, and I've been coaching for 20 years, right? So many of these coaches have been in the league for decades just to get one head coaching opportunity. And people are going to sit there and be critical of his decision to take control of his career? Absolutely not. If you are going up against your CEO, right? you're somewhat of a mid-level employee. You're going up against your CEO, and people are going to be critical about the decision that you make when the CEO wouldn't think or count to 2 before cutting you or laying you off? Absolutely not. Magic is going to go down as an all-time businessman, and so will the other owners. You don't get to $1 billion without being an incredible investor. Magic's got 100 different things that he's known for, and almost none of them come down to being the commanders in the commanders buying group. I don't care that the billionaires learned about finding the job on social media. How many times do we see the roles reversed on that? These billionaires are playing with monopoly money, and I'm never gonna feel bad for them getting their feelings hurt on social media. They're making a big fuss about it, and honestly, nobody thinks this is a big deal except for the commanders and their media. They have absolutely no leverage, right? They can't force Ben Johnson to take a role that he doesn't want. And if you were him stepping into that environment, would you want to trust a leadership group whose first year with the team decided, we're just gonna go with Sam Howell. We think that's the best way to make a splash for year 1. You go into that organization and you look, yeah, there's improvements. Anytime you get Dan Snyder out of the frickin' building, that's an improvement. And he has a valid reason to say, listen, this ownership group, they're basketball guys. Number 1, it's straight up not a lie. And he doesn't have to gamble with his career in the hands of people who are playing with monopoly money and who are honestly very qualified and in running a football operation. And then I think also it gives him Ben Johnson gets more credibility in my estimation because, you see that Bob Myers, the former GM of the Golden State Warriors, is the one running the head coaching search. How in the world can Ben Johnson think, that's fine, no worries? I mean, there are Hall of Fame GMs like Bill Polian, right, who are consultants for coaches and go out and look for head coaching hires, right? And they completely blow it, right? Bill Polian, who's a Hall of Famer, drafted Peyton Manning, had all those years with the Colts. He went and hired Matt Eberflus for the Chicago job. He clearly didn't get that right, and that guy's been in football for 50 years. So you think Bob Myers is gonna fly in on his private jet from San Francisco and come in and pick the right hire in a completely different sports league? I mean, I'm not doubting that great businessmen, of course they are. But being a great businessman, we know, with David Tepper, right? That guy's imploding every 15 minutes. So being as wealthy as possible doesn't make you qualified to run a football team or to make decisions and toy with someone's career, right? Because ultimately, he's the little guy. But listen, Dan Quinn will be a fine hire, and if they don't get a legitimate offensive coaching staff and get the QB right, Ben Johnson's gonna be the least of their problems. Drake May ain't putting butts in seats, and this is one of those times where I'm gonna tell you to get over it. Let's end with a doozy. The Athletic article about the Jets, Aaron Rodgers, Robert Saleh, and Zach Wilson. Haven't read it. Essentially, the high-level overview is that Aaron Rodgers runs the franchise way more than LeBron James has ever been accused of doing. And let me tell you why that's true. Nathaniel Hackett, the handpicked OC of Aaron Rodgers, who obviously had an all-time coaching mishap in Denver, is still retained in the role as offensive coordinator when they were one of the worst offenses, at times struggling to score 3 points with Zach Wilson and without. In what world would a legitimate GM and owner of an NFL franchise allow that to happen when the expectations are so great if they weren't being completely toyed with by Aaron Rodgers? There are people who are talking about how he played the rest of the American media as well as fans about how he's, such a light and airy guy on Hard Knocks. he really cares about his teammates. He was very locked in. All of these things, you could see through it, but you had hoped that a fresh set of scenery will kind of take the crankiness out of Aaron Rodgers. But now what you're seeing is he's now with a franchise that is so incredibly desperate and so needy for him. They're putting him on this incredible pedestal when, of course, as I've said a bunch of times, he's got one Super Bowl and he's not God. They are tying their entire success to one man's brain and one man's ability coming off of an Achilles tear in his early 40s. How is there not someone in that organization who can sit back and say, wait a minute, can we pull back 10% on this? Joe Douglas has no say in the building. He's supposed to be running the football team. In the article, they referred to him as the assistant GM. I mean, how is anyone in that building not extremely frustrated? You work your whole career for an opportunity to be the general manager of a football team. And then you got this guy who's walking in with no personnel experience, has been recommending players who clearly do not deserve the contracts they've had, the level of production or lack thereof for the guys that he's brought in. Then also he recommends Tim Boyle come in. Tim Boyle seems to be the source for the conversations are leaking from in this article. The article comes out, the dude gets cut. This building is completely imploding, right? Because they've tied their future, they've tied these next couple of years to an emotionally immature and unstable person. Let's just call it what it is, right? I hate to be super harsh about people's personalities, but at the end of the day, you see Robert Saleh, who is one of the most confident coaches that you will ever see in the NFL. And he's walking around looking over his shoulder, paranoid as hell, saying, can the source from the article step up, right? I mean, he's trembling, essentially, is what you think, right? I mean, how's that guy supposed to lead the rest of the building, right? How's he supposed to get buy-in when there are people who are essentially saying, well, Aaron Rodgers, he's essentially calling the plays, right? I mean, he's got his best friend, Nathaniel Hackett, who is clearly an abysmal offensive coordinator that is rivaling the likes of Adam Gase from a few years back with the Jets. Both of those offenses are so painful to watch. I'm not sure how Jets fans can feel comfortable knowing that somehow this franchise has become even more inept than before, right? There's just not a single person in the room who's willing to check Aaron Rodgers. And we saw what happened when, he almost had unchecked power until Brian Gutekunst comes in and, they don't have an owner over in Green Bay. And so you see this guy, he's just kind of testing people, right? Almost like a little kid, right? Like he's going to test the waters. He's going to push and push and push. And that's exactly what's happening. And it is absolutely pathetic that there's not a single person in that organization with enough power, including it seems like Woody Johnson, who is the freaking owner. Nobody wants to say anything to Aaron Rodgers. Last offseason, I was on this platform and others telling you that the Aaron Rodgers Jets thing was not going to work. People were in my comments saying, when they make a deep playoff run, I want an apology video. And I would absolutely oblige. But I knew that wasn't going to happen. And of course he gets injured, right? That's in nobody's control. That's one of the more bizarre things that we've ever seen. But now you have all of this fragmentation in the building on top of the horrible offensive play and calling. The coach who's walking like he's the next to go. And you also have the defense who seems to increasingly be more checked out because they're sick of putting their shit on the line only to ultimately end up with 3 points from the offense. It's a recipe for disaster. And I said that before all of this happened last year. And so writing on the wall on this one, we have some of the best teams, some of the strongest offensive teams are in the AFC. And you got surprises like the Houston Texans, right? Who nobody saw coming. And you're telling me 40-year-old Aaron Rodgers, where pretty much everyone in the building detests the guy except for the people in charge, he's gonna walk into that operation and they're gonna go and win a Super Bowl, or they're gonna go and win a playoff game? They might not even win their division. They might not even be able to win an away game in their division. I have been calling for this until I've been blue in the face. And I think I'm gonna end up on the right side of history on this one. Appreciate you stopping by. As always, hit the subscribe button. We'll be back soon to chat about some of the NBA headlines going into the second half of the season after the All-Star break. Stay tuned. Looking forward to chatting with you next time.